Today we're going to do page 12 of Promises to Keep. Start on page 12 rather and go to 15. Your books should begin to start looking a little bit like mine with our post-it sticking out, some ideas written down, ideas here. So a week from today is Wednesday, a week from today, you're going to be on spring break, but we're going to be getting you guys ready to be in bigger groups. And as we return, when we return, I should see a lot of us with Post-its in our books. If not, we are going to be starting. So make sure you are on point with your Post-its in books. Is key to understanding. It's even more important because I'm not right there with you guys. So this needs to definitely be happening. So remember, our focus for today is going to be, looking at his life in Pasadena and comparing it to life in the United States. Your Post-its are going to be really focused on his childhood. Jot down any facts or questions about his childhood. And then the 3 big Post-it questions today that you jot down as I read. How did Jackie's mom persevere? What is an example of the siblings taking care of each other? And what was life like in Pasadena? Page 12. Oh, before I get started, I want to take a note that 10 and 11 was kind of like a historical background. We learned about the segregation. We learned about African-American families moving from the South up to New York, Chicago, St. Louis, Detroit. So on page 12, we're learning more about the family background. And then on page 13, we learn a little bit more about Pasadena, and then it moves towards the whole United States. So she was very intentional with start with the background of the country, start with the background of his family, then continue with the background of the whole country again. Top of page 12. Mallie Robinson, my grandmother, was one of the early pioneering immigrants. She lived on a farm in Cairo, Georgia, in 1919 with her husband Jerry and their 5 children. They were sharecroppers, which meant they had farmed a section of land owned by whites for a share of the profit from the crops. Sharing what you make from the crops, sharecropper. That's where the word comes from. This system kept Black sharecroppers like my grandparents from getting ahead. Sharecroppers didn't own their own farms. They had to buy all their seeds, food, and equipment on credit from the white landowner. At the end of the year, the Black farmer had to give the white landowner up to 1/2 of his crop and repay all the credit. This is a question on your independent work. How does this system keep African Americans from getting ahead in life? The answer is right there, what I just said, page 12. After dealing with the frustrations of sharecropping, Jerry Robinson gave up and deserted the family. Mallie couldn't maintain the farm on her own, but my grandmother was a determined woman with an unflappable faith in God. As we're figuring out word meanings and using context clues, and you have that chart on your independent work, if I see the word unflappable, determined woman with an unflappable faith in God. If she's using that faith in God and not flapping, I think of a flag flapping in the wind. I would say that unflappable means like can't be shaken. Like you can't take away that faith from her. She packed up her children, Frank, Mac, Edgar, Willa Mae, and Jackie, and took a huge risk. Mallie and her family left the only life they've ever known. They traveled by train to Pasadena, California. There they lived with her brother until Mallie found work and a place for her family to live. My grandmother worked long hours cleaning and cooking in the homes of white families. Meanwhile, she insisted her children keep up their grades, work after school, and attend church every Sunday. The children learned early to protect each other. For a couple of years, my dad's sister, Willa Mae, took my father to school with her. Dad played alone in a sandbox outside her classroom until the kids came out for recess. Could that not be an example of siblings taking care of each other in your Post-its? This is now telling us what Pasadena was like. So any quick bullet points about life in Pasadena need to go on a Post-it and get stuck on 13. As a boy, Dad went to Cleveland and Washington elementary schools in Pasadena. The students were Black. The teachers were white. My father only got average grades, but he loved sports. With marbles, soccer, dodgeball, and baseball, Dad's reputation as a competitor and a winner began when he was just a young boy. Pasadena was a pretty city with lots of parks and other public recreational facilities. My dad couldn't go in most of them. The local YMCA refused my father membership because he was Black. The Pasadena movie houses he went to forced Black people to sit in one section. The local soda fountain wouldn't serve Black kids. Pasadena was divided into neighborhoods according to race. The boundaries were clearly drawn. Blacks lived only in certain parts of town. That didn't stop my grandmother. Mally and her sister and brother-in-law, Cora and Samuel Wade, raised enough money to buy a house. They ignored the racial boundaries and settled on a house at 121 Pepper Street. The house that they wanted happened to be in an all-white neighborhood. According to family stories, my grandmother knew that the owners wouldn't sell their home to a Black family. Mally got a light-skinned niece who could pass for white to purchase the Pepper Street house for them. After the closing, the Robinson and Wade families moved in together. The neighbors weren't exactly welcoming. My father was 3 years old when he and his family moved to Pepper Street. When he was 8, Dad got into a name-calling fight with the little girl who lived across the street. The children's verbal battle was interrupted when the girl's father came outside and started throwing rocks at my father. There were other incidents like that meant to intimidate my grandmother into moving off Pepper Street. A cross was burned on their front lawn. But in spite of the pressure from neighbors, my grandmother refused to leave Pepper Street. Over time, the block became mixed with families from Black, white, Asian, and Hispanic backgrounds. This is a fantastic example, evidence on the perseverance and hard work of Jackie's mother, Mally. As we turn to page 14, this is going to be information on the country as a whole. And a lot of this should sound familiar if you were paying attention during our poetry unit. While my father fought relatively small battles against racism in Pasadena, African American leaders across the country took the struggle to a new level. They waged battles in courts, in newspapers, and at street demonstrations. They supported educational and economic equity. Black leaders and activists such as Ida B. Wells and Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois took different positions and ordered different solutions to the problems of racial equality. I like that it tells us that all these different activists had different solutions to the same problem, but they all worked on solving it. They didn't just say, this isn't right, this isn't fair, complain, and then no action. If you see something that's wrong, you have to attack it in the way you see fit and make it fair for everyone. So even though they took different approaches, they did something to change it. By the 1920s, there were visible signs of hope and progress, and this is going to be a question in your independent work, so pay close attention. Black-owned and operated newspapers like the Chicago Defender, the Pittsburgh Courier, Boston's The Guardian, Ebony Magazine, formerly known as the Negro Digest, and the NAACP's monthly magazine The Crisis, and the Associated Negro Press sprang up to tell the story of racial progress and encourage anti-segregation resistance movement. There was also a small but growing professional class of African Americans who taught school, worked in hospitals as nurses and doctors, practiced law, and owned businesses. This is literally just like the BrainPop we watched about the Harlem Renaissance, about African Americans moving north. So this should all be coming back to us. And there we go. The Harlem Renaissance, named after New York City's vibrant Black neighborhood Harlem, brought forth great African American writers, artists, and musicians. Artists like Jacob Lawrence, writers like Langston Hughes, read him. Claude McKay, read him. Countee Cullen and Zora Neale Hurston, jazz musicians like Louis Armstrong, read about him. Duke Ellington, performers like singer, actor, activist Paul Robeson, and dancer Bill Bojangles Robinson, all rose to new heights of fame and popularity through the Harlem Renaissance. So I want you guys to take a note at my post-it here. The first thing I mention is page 14. I do like kind of a gist for my page. Page 14 is racial background in the United States. And on the page before, I wrote that page 13 was about racial background for Jackie Robinson as he was growing up in Pasadena. So same topic, wider scope. 1920s, hope and progress. Professionals, African Americans take up professional work, lawyers, doctors, things that they had never been before. And I say the paragraph on page 15 describes the Harlem Renaissance, which I studied recently, as did you guys. So that's an example of what your post-it could look like. You could have multiple little notes on each page. So in this section, you should have 3 post-its answering the 3 questions on the 3 post-its on the slide, and then any other noticings that you have, or questions or inferences, and this will help you better tackle that independent work.